Watchers in the Fourth Dimension.
He's the one you should be talking to, or rather listening to, if you have the stamina.
Your manner appeals only to the homicidal side of my nature.
Thank you, again and again, sir. Your goodness confounds me.
Hello and welcome back to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension. I'm Anthony.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Riley, and when someone fails me, someone dies.
Moons of Mercury. This episode, we're talking about Douglas Adams' first foray into Doctor Who with the Pirate Planet. But before we get into that, Riley's going to take a look at the mail. Over to you, Riley.
Thanks. We're going to have our responses from the Invasion of Time. First up is Doctor Who 60s, 70s, and 80s, who says, I am so glad you brought up those weird plastic chairs.
Yay!
It looks like... It looks like when you are sitting on them, you're basically laying on the floor. Why on Gallifrey do the Time Lords put them in those narrow corridors? If you lay on one, you'd be blocking everyone's way. Madness, I tell you. As you know, we will be doing a spin-off of interior decoration on Doctor Who, a spin-off podcast, so keep an eye on for that. Beardo Beatnik says, 6 out of 10 Sontarans killed by Leela. Seems like everyone, with the exception of Leela, is just sleepwalking and phoning in their performances. Leela kicks ass and is awesome, of course. Yes, of course. Agreed. John Thomas Casey has a lot to say. First up, he says that I find the last 2 episodes interminable, personally. The beginning for me isn't so bad, though I'm not a great fan of the Doctor being such a dick to Leela. But I'm predisposed to enjoy the beginnings of things, and not knowing what the hell is up and waiting for it all to come together is something I usually appreciate. The story, though, has so many things that I don't enjoy in Doctor Who. I think they could have ended this at part 4, and I would have been fine. I see what you all mean about the Vardens, but at least they're an interesting concept. Creatures that can travel along any wavelengths at will, and should really be some of the strangest aliens encountered yet on the show. The writers could even have invented a good reason for them to invade Gallifrey. Like, I don't know, the TARDIS travels through their wavelengths and disrupt them or something, so they decide to take matters into their own hands and stop the Time Lords. No need to bring the Sontarans into it, which I think was something we all kind of felt when we covered it.
Yeah.
No need for all the corridor wandering or the MacGuffin gun. They should just go for it. Just name a gun the MacGuffin gun on the show, just one time.
That would be amazing.
Keith Burton says, love the episode, very funny as always. I'm going to come to the defense of Derek Deadman, who played Storr. Derek was a very familiar face on British TV during the late 70s and early 80s. Born in Fulham, he specialized in playing tough London gangsters or petty criminals. I can't ever recall him doing anything other than a broad London accent. The production team are really to blame if they hire an actor who specializes in one character type, but then ask him to do something else. He was a short, broad-shouldered, and tough-looking man who was probably hired just because he looked right in the costume. Given the chaotic way the serial came together, that may have been their only consideration. I like this concept of, we can't find anyone that can fit the costume. We just need someone that can fit into the costume.
Oh, no.
Oh, lordy.
Mark Dunstan says, the CSO tinfoil Vardens. The main Sontaran looked like he had been in a fight with 2 black eyes and collagen lips. A big runaround and a poor ending for Leela. Such a shame. Really sad she went, but Milton Johns was great indeed. Leela, you are the best companion ever. That's high praise, and you know my Leela love, so I can't knock that at all. I have to agree. Kieran James Evans says, not quite as shocked by the scores for this one, to be fair, but still disappointed by Fang Rock's placement. I sort of agree with Anthony that it kind of peaks in part 4. The last 2 annoy me with the endless runaround, and it is cheap, but oh well. My impression why Williams and Reed didn't take up that offer to cut the season early was because they didn't trust it, and if they had done it, they would have cut to season 16's budget. Well, you only made 20 episodes last time. The best Barusa performance by far, just wait for the next ones, and Rodan is a great character, just wish she stayed as the companion. Leela's departure is bad, either she should have gone out fighting or become the warrior queen of the outsiders. I like that one better.
That one.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good. That's good. So Kieran gives it 5.5 out of 10. Sontaran alliteration taken a bit too far. Tony Monticello says, we have finally arrived at the last story I watched on transmission as a kid. The nostalgia-tinged glasses are about to come off. Uh-oh. Nostalgia or not, though, add me to the list of people who loved the first 2 episodes. The Doctor acting borderline villainous was unsettling in the best way, and the mystery of why kept me on the edge of my seat. K9 training his nose gun at Leela with the Doctor staring ominously into the distance is among the show's all-time great moments in my opinion. And yes, I found the eventual payoff satisfactory. The Vardens' mental abilities were a credible enough threat to explain the Doctor's behavior, and their ridiculous appearance is the stuff of, oh, it's so bad it's good legend. Not too sure about that. But okay. That said, I completely agree that Leela's exit was lame. Not even nostalgia can cover for that. She deserves so much better. I'm going to give it 8 oddly placed statues out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very high. Also, it seems to be that everyone's in agreement in regards to Leela's ending.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's just the consistency of the entire fandom.
Hashtag justice for Leela.
Yes, yes.
That one.
R.L. Gray says, nice analysis, watchers. I overall agree this one is not the worst thing in the world. It's full of good ideas and characters, but suffers from some poor execution and follow-through. As an example, I'm not so bothered by the location choices for the deep TARDIS interior, since we've long learned the inside of the TARDIS can basically look like anything. But the clear difference in image between video and film makes it very jarring. That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Watching this as a kid, it was not all clear to me that the hospital corridors and such were meant to be part of the same place we had been watching the Doctor and friends interact all those years. By the way, in a few seasons, we'll get something like a full 2 episodes of wandering around the inside of the TARDIS. Oh, how fun. R.L. Gray goes on to say, though for my money, much better handled. A little disappointed you didn't mention K9 calling the TARDIS stupid. Bitchy K9 is always a win for me.
It's fair.
Yeah. Good friend R. Alan Seiler says 7.83 for Underworld, 6.67 for Invasion of Time, the 2 highest rated stories of the season. I mean, there's going against the grain of accepted fan opinion, and then there's this. I get it, you're just trolling us, right? That has to be it. Seriously, though, I really do enjoy Invasion of Time, but unlike the Watchers, I really love the first 2 parts. The way that it throws you into a story already in progress with no explanation, the unpredictability of the Doctor's behavior, and more. It makes those episodes enormous fun for me and crucial to the story. I think parts 3 and 4 are so good because of the payoff we get from all that set up in the first 2. I think this is by far Milton John's best Doctor Who role. He's so deliciously slimy and duplicitous, but in many ways, though the story belongs to Louise Jameson and Leela's exit from the show, but not from our hearts, damn right, and she gets a great script to go out on, except for the final line, Andred asks, where will he go? And Leela responds wistfully, somewhere else. Probably the dumbest line ever written in Doctor Who. Wow. Wow. And yes, Julie, I completely agree and have said many times over the years that Leela's exit should have been her choosing to live amongst the outsiders because she fits in with them. There we are again. There it is. The final 2 parts are completely forgettable and a waste of an otherwise excellent foe. Had this been a 4-parter and the Vardens not been so absolutely shit, this would have been a cracker of a story. It comes so close to being not only a classic, but an epic season finale. For that, I will give it 6 sniveling castellans out of 10. That's a great metric there. I like that.
It really is.
Okay, so we have some responses to our season 15 Big Finish. First up, Guy Lambert saying, gosh, I listened to this back when it came out and was so excited. Let's just say that the interviews with Louise Jameson and Fraser Hines express why I ended up being so disappointed.
Yes.
David McCracken says, what a fun episode. Such a great way to end the season with a Jamie Leela ender. Well, sort of. How awesome for the watchers, even if it's not a perfect story. Moving on. The season 15 retrospective. The Whovian gal says, never have my opinions diverged more from those of the watchers than on this season. I love the Sunmakers and loathe Underworld, but I thoroughly enjoyed this retrospective. On a side note, Riley needs to listen to the Big Finish Gallifrey series once you are done with season 18. Tons of Leela content, including some of your dream scenarios. Okay, wait. Okay, hang on. Right.
Oh.
Has she been checking internet history on me or something?
Quick, Riley, clear your browser history.
Clear history. Moving Gal goes on to say, and spoilers, Andred does not last very long. Austin E. Patterson says, you guys are such a great advertisement for the season 15 collection box set.
Are we, though?
Yeah,
Are we?
that's very...
I think that was sarcasm.
Yes, that's well done. Well done. Keith Burton says, season 15 is decidedly weird. A real transition season, and you can tell is not an easy transition. But next season, we get to see the show become far more representative of the way Graham Williams wanted it to be. One of my favorites. Well, that's good to know, and we're in it right now. David Gordon says, definitely a curate's egg of a series, this one. That's an interesting term. I'm never familiar with that. I still hold up Horror Thing Rock as the best of the run, followed by the Sunmakers, but I do agree that Underworld is vastly underrated and is only really the visuals that let it down. Had this been a Big Finish audio-only release, I suspect it would be better remembered. I was exactly the right age to appreciate K9 when he first appeared and still hold a soft spot for the character now. However, I think it's fair to say that the 11-year-old me didn't truly appreciate Louise Jameson at the time, but as I have gotten older, this has brought me around to Riley's point of view. Let's just refer to it as Riley's point of view then. Okay, fine.
Oh, no. Continue.
Oh, I failed to mention, very important there, after that statement, David provides a winking emoji, just to really hammer that home. One that wasn't mentioned, but for me, best use of music came in episode, I think, 2 of The Invasion Time when Leela pursues the Doctor until he locks himself away in the TARDIS. Very atmospheric and tension builds. Anyhow, looking forward to the Key to Time series. I already know that I hold one opinion which seems contrary to fandom as a whole, and after what comes of 15, I look forward to hearing what the Watchers team think.
I'm looking forward to hearing that controversial opinion, because I have my own opinions on this season that we're working through right now, and I feel relatively uninfluenced by fandom on this season. So I'm very excited not just to see what the two of you think, but also what our listeners think.
I have a feeling it's going to be a lot more debated than last season because of the macro plot line, but
yeah,
we will see. Guy Lambert says, great fun. I know you guys had mixed feelings about this mixed season, but compared to other seasons, I feel like you had a lot more fun and laughter while reviewing it. That's kind of what we do. For better or for worse, we have a good time, and we do love the show. I think we need a fun metric, Anthony. Please add a column to your spreadsheet.
No.
Don't give him ideas. Stop. Okay. Nicholas Rutherford says, thank you for another entertaining episode. I don't agree with your choices, but do agree regarding Underworld being much better than its reputation. For me, this was a bit like a happy anniversary episode, as it was in April 2020 that I chanced upon your Season 3 retrospective. We've all come a long way since then. I like the sense of community that's built up over that time, with many of us commenting on the show. Oh, it's very nice. And chatting to each other sometimes, too. Keep up the good work. Best wishes, Nick. Thank you, Nick. That's very sweet. And wrapping up, John Thomas Casey says, I never really considered before that it might be controversial to prefer Leela to Sarah. I have time for both, but I also know who I prefer, and it's the Warrior of the Seven team and her Janice Thorns. To me, the Watchers staying pretty firm on this just affirms what I've always thought, and I'm pretty sure we're far from being alone. It needn't be the one is better than the other, but let's face it, non-contemporary companions are often, well, just kind of more interesting, and Louise Jameson brought such enthusiasm and commitment to the role. Underworld as a season favorite for all of you, though? Question mark. Yeah. That's definitely new. It's not mine, but I still approve. Champion the underdog by all means. And just for the sake of showing his views, he gave his own ranking for the serials. Number 6 is Invasion of Time. Number 5, The Invisible Enemy. Number 4, Underworld. Number 3, The Horror of Fangrock. Hey now, not putting that in number 1, number 2. People don't seem to like that. Number 2, Sunmakers. And number 1, Image of the Fendal. It was nice to hear that someone else is giving their rankings. But that is the end of the mail. So back to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Riley. It feels like that was a lot of mail. But as a reminder to our listeners, we really do love getting your feedback, thoughts, comments, and questions. And as you have just heard Riley do, we do try to read out as many of your comments as possible on the show. So please do get in touch. As always, you can contact us through Facebook, Instagram, and X at Watchers4D, or you can email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. Additionally, we would absolutely love it if you subscribe to the podcast, if you're not doing so already, and dropped us a review or rating on your favorite podcasting platform. Now, to head behind the scenes on the Pirate Planet. In spring 1977, Douglas Adams was commissioned to write the pilot episode of a new radio comedy to be called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Whoop, whoop.
Wonder what happened to that. Anyway, he sent the scripts into the Doctor Who production office, where it drew the attention of outgoing script editor Robert Holmes, and he arranged a meeting for Adams with his successor, Anthony Reed. At that meeting, Adams was offered the opportunity to develop ideas for the show's 16th season, being made aware that all 6 stories would be linked by the Key to Time narrative. Adams started by considering how his narrative might be driven by the camouflage nature of the segments, and he suggested that one of them could be disguised as something large and very important, forcing the Doctor to deal with the ramifications of reverting it back to its true form. He thought about making the segment the Atlantic Ocean, the continent of Africa, or even the sun or the moon.
Yeah, just a little bit important.
However, he ultimately started developing a storyline called The Perfect Planet. Adams was aware that the Doctor would be joined on his travels by a junior Time Lord, and he wanted the Doctor to one-up his new overly keen companion. With this, he suggested that the Doctor would find the segment very, very quickly as a piece of rubbish in the very first opening minutes of the episode, and would then conceal that from Romana so he could use the search as an excuse to investigate some sort of mystery. and the resulting plot would have resulted in the Doctor trying to discover the origins of a new set of moons that had appeared in orbit around the planet Jetrel. He would learn that the Time Lords had once come to Jetrel to mine a rare time crystal and erected a giant totem which drained the aggression from its militant population, leaving them extremely placid. However, the Time Lord Malkios, who had been dispatched to deactivate the totem after the conclusion of the mining operation, instead became trapped within the mechanism. Over millennia, all of Jetrel's malign emotions were absorbed into Malkios, and he was transformed into a psychopath bent on revenge against his people. Malkios used the mining equipment to hollow out Jetrel, and the slag from that was going to form the additional moons, and then used his amassed time crystals to turn the planet into a TARDIS. Malkios planned to materialize it around Gallifrey, allowing him to harness the power of the Time Lords and take over the universe. The Doctor used his own TARDIS to arrive in Gallifreyan airspace at the same time as Jetrel, foiling Malkios' plans. Romano was to destroy the travel mechanism, while the Doctor severed Malkios' link to the totem, ending his life. So you can kind of see the seeds of what we actually ended up with in there. There are various elements that eventually made it to screen. However, Graham Williams was a bit concerned about that approach, particularly because he felt that Time Lords were becoming involved in far too many storylines. And he also commented that a device which drained aggression had very recently appeared in the Sunmakers. To replace these elements, Williams suggested a space pirate character, in response to which Adams created the Captain. And his original idea was that the Captain had been exiled to another universe by, surprise, surprise, the Time Lords, and was planning to return to the regular universe by teleporting an entire planet. Adams also wanted to include a female villain who would pose as a nurse in service to the Captain. His first inclination was that the nurse would be the daughter of the Master, before deciding that she should simply be a female incarnation of the Master. Suck on that, Moffat, 37 years early. Eventually, it was decided to reduce the Time Lord presence in the story even further, and so the nurse became the guise of the ancient Queen Ixoxaxox. Try saying that 3 times quickly while drunk. By the time Adams was given the green light to turn the Pirate Planet into full scripts, he had also been contracted to write a further 5 episodes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and was in a producer role for a show on BBC Radio 4. As a result, progress on the Pirate Planet slowed significantly. However, he continued to refine his vision as he wrote the scripts, introducing the polyphase Avitron, refining the idea of the Mentiads, and renaming the Queen to Xanxia and using her quest for immortality as an allegory for drug addiction. That would get obviously toned down significantly in the version that made it to screen. And he did also return to his idea for the Key to Time segment being a large object, making it the planet Califrax. Upon submission of the scripts, Reed discovered that they needed a significant amount of editing. They were still too long and complex, and Adams basically had no experience with television at this point, so he had no idea of what could actually be done within the show's budget. Fortunately, director Pennant Roberts, who we previously saw handling The Face of Evil and The Sunmakers, was hired, and he helped refine the scripts. The BBC head of serials Graham MacDonald did not like the scripts, which he felt were too humorous, and pushed to cancel the story and replace it with something else. However, with tight timelines in production, Reed and Roberts persuaded MacDonald to allow the story to go ahead. Joining Roberts' behind-the-scenes team, our key players include the continued presence of John Nathan Turner as production unit manager and Dudley Simpson providing incidental music. As our designer, we have the only contribution to Doctor Who by John Pusey, who also worked on Softly Softly Task Force, The Aeneid Line, and Tales of the Unexpected. And as costumer, we have the 4th and final contribution of L. Roland Warne, who had previously worked on both Death of the Daleks and Planet of the Spiders from Season 11, as well as The Brain of Morbius from Season 14. Filming was somewhat plagued by more strike action of the BBC. It was a pretty common thing at this point in time. The UK economy was basically going to hell, so the workers were unhappy. But the production team made it work, and the story was made with very few other hitches. The final version was broadcast at the usual time on consecutive Saturdays between the 30th of September and the 21st of October, 1978. And before we jump in and discuss this, the short summary is with me, so here we go. In search of the second segment of the Key to Time, we're heading to the planet Califrax. Wait, no, we're actually heading to Xanax, which is where Califrax should be? Anyway, on Xanax, we find a mad pirate captain declaring a new golden age of prosperity for its adoring people. This means that the lights in the sky change and new rare minerals appear out of nowhere. Meanwhile, a sinister cult called the Mentiads are getting stronger with every new golden age of prosperity. Actually, scratch that. They're not sinister. They're actually quite friendly, maybe. Anyway, turns out that the captain transports Zanuck to other planets, crushing them, mining them for their minerals, and all of this to just keep the evil Queen Xanxia alive. Meanwhile, she's posing as his nurse in order to build herself a new, younger corporeal form. Their next target after Califrax turns out to be Earth? You know, just to ramp up the tension a bit for the audience, whatever. Of course, the Doctor saves the day, and the entire planet of Califrax turns out to be the second segment. Luckily, it wasn't inhabited. This story is truly bonkers in a way that only Douglas Adams can manage. All right, guys, let's talk about it. Part 1, where we start off with some very bad model work.
So the first shot, I agree, not so great. The second shot, I actually was pretty okay with.
The shot of the city doesn't look good, but then the bridge does.
I'm okay with that one, I think. Yeah, I am.
I'm nitpicking.
That's the thing, is there's things you could nitpick in this one because there are some great sets. I really love the set design in a lot of aspects. Some of the special effects, CSO work, not so great.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the dialogue.
Oh, yes.
It's amazing. It's so good.
Love the captain. He is so wonderfully over the top, and I love that there's like this softer underbelly for him that you occasionally see. And I also love Mr. Fibuli, who is effectively the sniveling Smee-like character.
I'm going to have to go against everybody on this one. I did enjoy the dialogue, but the voice of the captain and his performances... Let me rephrase that. The voice of the captain is a choice. I got really tired of that, especially when I find out later, as you described in your short summary, where this goes, what's actually happening behind the scenes. And I would think, well, damn, that's a lot more interesting than having to deal with the pompous, loud, what you would think to be the villain for X amount of episodes. I just couldn't stand him. I would have been better if it was a different type of villain, a different type of character, even if it was the fake villain, but just that loud, classic Shakespearean delivery just constantly, it just got on my nerves. I really didn't like it. No, dislike.
I loved it too, and it would have been even better if it had been Brian Blessed.
Oh,
I think I would have allowed that, because if it was Blessed, then I could really just imagine him, even if he didn't say it because it's Doctor Who, I could imagine him saying some curse words, and I could just feel in my brain and make me feel all warm and fuzzy inside, but not with this.
I loved it because in juxtaposition of Mr. Fibuli, I thought that worked very well.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he had basically a pet falcon that was made out of metal was great. And I don't know, it was just a lot of fun giving him the kind of language that they gave him. Calling people nincompoop is always very fun. I'll have your bones bleached.
I had that, yes.
So wonderful. I can maybe see your point a little bit, Riley, except for the fact that I liked it.
With the captain, I also really like that throughout the story, Pennant Roberts gives us a lot of close-ups of his face. And you see he's quite expressive, and you see a lot of eye movement, and despite half his face being covered in machinery, it works quite well. I really, really enjoy him and the way he's handled.
The direction really seemed to want to put an emphasis on the captain's appearance, because in that opening shot where you hear him bellowing at people, you don't see his face. They give a lot of shots off of his shoulder, above his shoulder, and they don't show him. And then they finally reveal him at the end, which I thought that was a bit strange, because they build all that tension up just to show him, okay, it's all right looking. It looked like he fell asleep face down in a Radio Shack, but it doesn't really feel like it deserves that big of a reveal. I feel like we're going to have a disagreement in regards to the captain. I think the captain is going to be our main sense of debate here.
By the way, Riley mentioned Radio Shack. Kids, ask your parents.
Oh, yeah, really? Yeah. It used to exist. I'm not old.
One thing that was interesting is that we get to the Doctor a lot sooner than we have been recently.
Yeah.
They had the opening, that's not the Doctor, but we got to the Doctor within like 4 minutes.
I think that's been a change since Anthony Reid took over, because we open with the Doctor in the Invasion of Time. We open with the Doctor again in the Reboss operation. So that's something that I think is becoming a bit more common, is getting to the Doctor straight away. And I really like that. Gives us our heroes a lot faster.
It's funny because both of you were saying how quickly it felt, but
Oh, because you don't like the
just wanted
captain.
to get away from the captain. I know, really.
I know. I was like, that was 4 minutes. It felt like it was 8.
But yeah, I love Romana. I just want her to correct everything I ever do and say.
Her look is very interesting. This is the first time on the show that I can really get a sense of like a bit of the 80s coming into it about what she was wearing.
Yeah, the shoulders were a bit padded. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was also the material, that kind of like shiny, glossy kind of jacket she was wearing.
That's really interesting, Riley, and I'm going to go off topic just a little bit, but I think we as humans tend to very clearly segment decades, and it's not like January 1st, 1980, the world changed. So there's more of a slow transition from the 70s style into the 80s style, and to your point, you're starting to see that with certain fabrics and certain styles at this point in time.
Which is going to be very interesting because I feel like from a person who never got this far through Classic Who before and has watched all of New Who, and even before I watched New Who, as a random person in this country, the things you see of Doctor Who, just that come to you from the last 30 years or 20 years or so, are mostly shots from New Who, Baker, and maybe the first Doctor. You don't see anything that looks 80s from Doctor Who.
Yeah.
We're about to get into that.
Yes, we are.
Going to be fun. Getting back to what Anthony was talking about, Romana basically putting the Doctor in his place
I love her.
by calling him out on all the things that he does wrong. That's great. And
Well, bouncing off of that regards to Romana, I have a question for both of you because we seem to all be in line on this. The writing feels like Romana is being written more to being at the level of the Doctor than any other companion we have seen.
Mm-hmm.
Do we agree on that?
yes,
Absolutely. She's a Time Lord and she's got this confidence about her that's balanced with a little bit of naivety. I think it works really well as she's like a proto-Doctor, almost.
It's also interesting because how the Doctor reacts to her, because I feel that with him, when she does something that may prove him wrong or that she did better than him, I feel like other times when a companion would do that, he either would have like an amusement like, oh, wow, that dog's playing poker, or he'll get angry. But this time he kind of just will maybe be a little bit upset because he got beaten, but he doesn't seem to take it so personally if she ups him.
He does get quite butthurt when the people on Zanuck just ignore him, and then she goes to talk to them and talks to them straight away. And it's because she's prettier. I really enjoy that because it gives us a little bit of a view into the Zanuck society. These people are incredibly superficial. They've got used to all these precious baubles, and they're more inclined to talk to someone who looks good and looks pretty than they are to talk to someone like the Doctor. I think that's really clever.
I really like it. Again, I'm going to talk about dialogue a lot. Sorry, everyone. But when the Doctor calls out, good looks are no substitute for sound character, I don't know. I just really like that phrase. I do have a question. So as she's going through, she's also bribing people with jelly babies. Do they count if they come from Romana?
They do.
Okay.
They do.
Well, there's like 3 bags throughout this cereal.
So we will take those as we get to them. But yes, in this episode, she holds out the jelly baby bag. The Doctor takes one of them, and then the guy she's talking to has 4. So we're already at 5 for this episode.
Wow.
And on top of that, she stole them from his pocket. Love that. Love that chutzpah from her. Let's talk about some of our supporting characters, because we also meet Pralix, Kimmus, Balaton, and Mula, who I really enjoy. Mula and Kimmus. Balaton is kind of a dick because he just wants Pralix to shut up so that nobody finds him and that they're not noticed.
He's not in there much anyway.
He's not. And because of Pralix and his condition, we also meet the Mentiads. I really like that they are built up very early on as kind of a menace. They talk very ominously. They talk about the vigil of evil. The one called Pralix must be harvested. And they say that it's the time of vengeance. All of this is like, wow, these guys are the bad guys. And they get ominous music as well.
Oh, the music is wonderful.
And then later on, they just don't seem to be much of a threat or have much power, really, do they?
Well, they're the good guys.
I know, but I'm saying that they appear so strong, but they seem to be kind of easily taken out of the equation in the last bit of the serial.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
I think it would have been nice if they had stayed unknowingly bad for a little bit longer than what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was just a little too quick, but I still really, really enjoyed them, especially there at the beginning.
It's so interesting because you kind of know that the captain's a villain, but then you also have this other group that's at the beginning presented as a villain. So you're kind of left wondering, all right, who are actually the bad guys, or are they both the bad guys and everyone else on Zanuck are just the unfortunate people caught in the middle of two bad groups? And obviously we get the revelation that the Mentiads are good, but that first episode, it really gives you this mystery as to who you shouldn't be rooting for.
You know, the Mentiads remind me of a character type that seems to pop up a lot in science fiction, and that is kind of the psychic, bald, maybe like zombie-esque, dead, kind of wearing robes character. I think of Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I also think of a straight comedic take on it is the Observer character from Mystery Science Theater 3000. So that's what I could always see when I saw the Mentiads.
I think it even goes back to that very first episode of Star Trek, The Cage, right? Where you have those bulbous-headed creatures that keep Captain Pike and co. kind of hostage. Yeah. Can we talk about the guards for a second?
Oh,
The Gimp Police?
It's very Judas Priest, tight black leather costumes with metal studs. I keep expecting Rob Halford to show up.
They're really big into punishment.
Yeah.
I don't know how they can see. And I understand that we always like to make bad guys really bad shots because then they would probably just shoot everyone and everyone would be dead. But they're really bad.
Oh, yeah. They definitely went to the Stormtrooper gun school. Yeah.
So bad. But yeah, the guard costumes are very interesting. And I want to make one other note because we haven't talked too much about K9, but the little robot bird being interested in K9 is kind of like a really wonderful thing because it hints that there's going to be some sort of showdown later, in which there is.
Yeah.
That is something I like a lot because it's one of those things, and I've heard people use this as a way of giving a compliment to Star Wars for its world building. It allows you as the audience to take a little moment outside of perhaps our main characters in seeing a small interaction with the entities or the creatures that inhabit this universe. And even if it's just a quick little gag, a little playful thing, or as this is actually even a lot more important because we actually have a very climactic fight. But it's just those little asides there between little characters. It adds more to the world.
Yes, exactly. And I realize we've talked about this episode for quite a long time. So just to bring it to the end, the Doctor and Romana make it to Balaton's house where you've got Pralix and Kimus and Mula, and the guards then show up. K9 shoots them in the dick, and when the Doctor asks how long they're stunned for, he says indefinitely, so he's killed them.
Yep.
Death by shot to the dick. Amazing.
Yeah, but the guards liked it. It's okay.
And then the Mentiads get there, have no time for the Doctor's nonsense, and take him out twice. And that's our cliffhanger. And we're into episode 2.
Just to go back to our little robot bird, we get to see him in action here with the captain finally killing somebody in a, I wouldn't say it's a very efficient way of killing someone, but it's very theatrical. It's very dramatic.
Well, I think it probably has the effect of scaring the shit out of everyone because there's that lineup of people and you don't quite know who Polyphase Avatron's actually going to kill. So the captain just lets him loose and there's this tension building up as they're figuring out who's going to die.
Yeah, it's like the Al Capone scene with the baseball bat and the Untouchables.
Yeah, exactly.
We do get a little bit of an instance of the Doctor ignoring K9 about where Romana is.
Yes.
Yep. And the Doctor tends to do that, so I'm not terribly surprised, but he then does it later on with not knowing where K9 is, or like there's just a whole bunch of different things that are going on. It's like, okay, Doctor, stop ignoring people.
Yeah, absolutely.
This part also has what I think shows how good Douglas Adams is. So we have always discussed how the show falls into certain tropes, and one of those is the companion being captured. Well, Douglas Adams, when presented with this, he realizes that how the show flows most of the time, that's something that's going to happen. But with this, and maybe he has the advantage because it's Romana, so it's easier to write it this way. Romana's captured, but unlike previous times, she is completely unfazed. In fact, it gets to a point of a wonderful bit of humor as she literally is talking the ear off of the guard the entire way back. And that's just so brilliant and wonderful as to being one of those things where she has turned it on its head. It was kind of like, well, who is the captor and who is the captured?
And at that point, I'm like, just marry me already, Romana.
So then we have Mula and K9 pairing up together, and then the Doctor and Chemos pairing up together. And the Doctor tempts the guards with a bag of jelly babies.
Yes. And I think we count entire bags as 10.
Yes.
That's what we said. So that brings us up to 15 so far this episode.
Yes.
This is going to be the record, isn't it?
It definitely is.
And the music when the Doctor steals the air car was great. It was very fun. So I'm just putting that out there for later.
I also really love the conversation between the Doctor and Chemos, because we're starting to get bits and pieces of what's going on here. When the new golden age of prosperity is declared, Chemos reveals that the mines just miraculously fill up again and the lights in the sky change. So something's very clearly not right. And the Doctor's starting to kind of get an idea. He says that he normally saves planets, but this time he's arrived far, far too late. I kind of like how this drops breadcrumbs that help you kind of figure out what's going on here.
Speaking of breadcrumbs, I think there's a slight other one. So, know the nurse.
Yep.
And it seemingly, the nurse saves Romana, but it's not because of just her wanting to save another woman or anything like that. It's because she sees the TARDIS as some way for them to do some of that travel bit. So you know that the nurse isn't just a nurse, but you're not given enough to figure anything else out. And that's really kind of interesting.
And I mean, this comes just after Mr. Fibuli has given bad news about the travel capabilities and some of the damage that's been done. She obviously has an interest in this, and it's kind of clear why Nursey thinks it's interesting. But yeah, I agree, Julie. There's clearly more to her at this point than meets the eye. I really like how this builds.
I didn't really guess what was going on with her, so I really liked that whole aspect of it. But we'll get there when we get there.
This episode, I also feel, is where we really see the Doctor getting back to the Bugs Bunny thing. Because
Yes.
when Romana tells the captain, well, I'm only the Doctor's assistant, and they put everyone on alert to find him, and he just waltzes onto the bridge, assumes that Mr. Fibuli's the captain, starts chewing his ear off, and then he's very soon corrected, and the captain states, Doctor, beware, your manner only appeals to the homicidal side of my nature. I love it. I love it.
I have a really weird thing that I started to make a connection through, and there should be zero connection, so bear with me. When you have that hallway thing where for some reason it has to work in such a manner that they have to go really fast through that hallway,
yeah.
It unfortunately reminded me of Box of Delights and Going Swift.
Oh,
So
God.
anytime they went down the hallway, I was like, they went
no.
swift.
Oh,
And
no.
it was problematic. Whoever wanted us to watch the Box of Delights, I blame you.
I think that was Keith Burton. Keith, Julie blames you. All right. I want to talk a little about the design in this, because there are two things I really noticed. Firstly, what's with all the guns looking a little bit phallic?
Oh.
I mean, why not?
Secondly, the engine room looks suspiciously like a power plant. And
Oh.
you saw a lot of that in Blake 7, and I'm just sitting there thinking, did the BBC just have a blanket deal with Britain's energy providers at this point in time? Just come use our power plants, give us money, please.
Basically, I would not be surprised
But
at
yeah.
all.
Speaking of sets, I love the bridge.
Yeah, the bridge is great.
I like the colors, like just adding color to it just makes it pop a little bit more. But it's done in such a way with the different platforms and everything that it actually makes it seem like it's something unique and not a generic bridge.
I also want to talk about, as we get to the end of episode 2, there's kind of a lot that goes on here. The Doctor somehow manages to bluff the captain with a story about both him and Romana being needed to open the TARDIS door. I don't quite know how that works, but it somehow does. So Captain's not that smart. And as we head down into the mines, we start figuring out what goes on. So the Doctor realizes the whole planet dematerializes and rematerializes around other planets in order to mine them. And there's that realization that whole other planets have died, some of them being inhabited. That's a really horrific thought.
It really is. And I can't help but think of, not that I'm a comic book nerd at all, but I immediately thought of the comic book character Galactus, the World Eater, which is basically what we have here, as you described.
Yeah.
And it is terrifying. It really is. In fact, it's so interesting how this is something that Douglas Adams did with Hitchhikers, and he's done here. Only he can take something as horrendous and terrifying as a mass extinction event, and that's basically what it would be, and you're still not completely like disgusted or just depressed by it. You kind of still move with the story because he's just so talented with making you laugh or moving you on. It's quite impressive that he can play with those things and you're just not feeling weighed down by it.
What I think's fascinating about how he writes this is the Doctor still does his Bugs Bunny shtick, but he's not quite driving the comedy in the same way. He's almost like an outside influence on it. Mm-hmm. And so he can very easily switch from Bugs Bunny to absolute outrage at this.
Yes.
Right.
And it really adds that oomph to it because he's not being the comic relief of the story. That is the dynamic between the captain's bluster and Mr. Fibuli's sniveling, Smee-like characteristics. And it works really well for me.
What I really like too is you can tell by the writing that this is just a different writer than they've had before with Doctor Who. Like, It does feel very different. I've read Douglas Adams, so it's like, yes, this fits within the Douglas Adams realm. It still works for Doctor Who, but I don't know what it is about it, but it just seems so much more depth to it, I think.
Before we wrap this episode up, while they're in the mines, Romana pulls the tracer out, and this story so far has felt a lot less connected to the story arc than the Reboss operation did. The Reboss operation was very much all about the Jetheric and tracking down the Jetheric and where it was and making sure they got it into their hands. Here, it's very much forming a secondary part of the plot.
As it should, I believe. In all fairness to the Rebos operation, I understand why it needed to be hit on a lot in that, because that was the very first key thereafter. That was what established our macro plot for the season. So I can understand they wanted to like re-emphasize it and just keep reminding the audience this is what we're doing all season.
And I think you need to do that in the opener, and you also need to do that in the final story, because that's obviously going to be all about resolving the whole thing. But here, I agree, this is the right amount of balance. It doesn't overpower the story. You could take the key to time out of this and it would still work really well.
Yes.
So we end the episode when the guards arrive, the Doctor and friends run away and are faced straight away with the Mentiads who say, "Doctor, we have come for you." And that's our cliffhanger. Part 3.
Once again, we're dealing with more details of how things are going on here about the destruction of planets. And it's still amazing to me because we already touched on this, but the Mentiads having their powers strengthened by the destruction of each planet, that's pretty damn disturbing.
It's one of those crazy things because since they're not really interacting with the actual destruction of the planets, they're at no ways of faults. So it's one of those like unfortunate but fortunate consequences. And that's what I really love about it is instead of giving that to people who are deciding to destroy those planets, it's people who don't even know. That's so interesting.
And I think they're fascinating because Moolah's the one who kind of says they slammed him to the wall with, "I'm picking up good vibrations."
Thank you so much.
They're giving me excitations.
Yes, I had note of that as well.
Julie, somehow I thought you would pick up the Beach Boys reference there. Just a hunch I had.
Just a little bit. The world building of this. Sorry, I know you were going off with Moolah, but just so good.
This whole episode, this is the exposition episode, but it's handled really well. I think exposition episodes can often seem kind of bogged down and don't really flow. And yet I think the humor in this and the dialogue make it really work. And you see that in everything. Mr. Fibuli, he's getting blamed for everything by the captain, who threatens to kill him, but never actually does. And he has his fairly dry wit. "Oh, thank you again and again, sir. Your goodness confounds me." I love him. He is brilliant.
Well, I find interesting the relationship between the captain and Mr. Fibuli, because the captain's constantly talking about killing him, never does. Mr. Fibuli is constantly not quite undermining him, but making comments about it. And then when you get to part 4 and you find out what the captain's true thoughts were of Mr. Fibuli, you're just like, what was happening? Like, the captain's end game was so well thought out and so well hidden that I think that's amazing.
Good job, Westley. I'll probably kill you tomorrow.
And I was just going to start talking about some more plot points because guess what we get sometime soon? The other bag of jelly babies.
Oh yeah, so that brings us up to 25 jelly babies. And this time the trick doesn't work. And someone mentioned sometimes the jelly babies are actually licorice all sorts, and this is one of those times that they are. We're still going to count it, but did notice these were not technically jelly babies. some broader plot points that come up in the exposition. This is where we first hear about Queen Xanxia and how the captain kind of came to power following Queen Xanxia's galactic wars that ruined Zanak. I think that's really, really interesting. And on the back end of that, we also see the captain patting himself on the back over his engineering feats, both his previous ship as well as the planet. Although, again, one element of the dialogue, the captain has just congratulated himself on the engineering feats of the planet. And then when Mr. Fibuli tries to suck up, the captain gets angry about it because he actually hates his life on Zanak and wants to return to his real pirating ways. I think it's so fascinating, that dynamic between the two of them.
We get a reference to Leela after the Doctor is captured.
Mm-hmm.
He starts talking about Janus Thorns.
No more Janus Thorns. Oh, Leela.
But I do like with Leela being mentioned, and then we start talking about this Warrior's Code, and I'm like, okay, that kind of ties in a little bit. But I did like how the Doctor's like, you can't kill me when I'm helpless.
Yeah, it's against the Warrior's Code.
Oh, it's so good. I love that.
This episode just sets things up so brilliantly because we start seeing things like the nurse speaks to the captain in ways that no one else would dare. You also see the captain showing the Doctor his trophies, which are the remains of the planets he's destroyed. The Doctor, in a very doctorish way, says the engineering is brilliant, but he's also furious about it and describes them as being nothing more than toys. And the captain kind of lets it slip. These are not toys, there's a purpose behind it. But we don't find out what that is until the next episode. Again, it comes back to those breadcrumbs and how all of this is set up for the final episode. It's very clever.
It really is. Though, I hate to bring this up again, but at this point in the serial, I don't know if we're doing it or I'll just save it for our retrospective, but I think I'm going to have to put a Worst Supporting Actor nomination for Bruce Purchase as the captain.
Boo.
I'm sorry. It's just rubbed me the wrong way. And I feel like I've seen this type of back and forth before on the show where we have the sniveling underling and the pompous, loud, blustering villain who just starts making these hilarious comments of bleaching bones and blah, 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 blah. It's just, it wouldn't be so bad if maybe they dialed it back a little bit or they changed, it was a different type of villain or maybe there was less of him, maybe.
So I want to argue with you though, because
please.
Yes, while through parts 1 through 3, that is your interpretation and that is what is presented to you. Then when you come to find out that this whole time he's been undermining someone else, I actually think that makes him a much more interesting character because a lot of it was bluster and a lot of it was an act with everything else that he was doing. So that makes him a much better character.
I agree with that. But that's one of the things, though, is you don't know that until later. While you're experiencing it at the time, you experience it only assuming it's only going to go so far. Because that's usually how it is with the show. We don't really get reveals like this. Honestly, I kind of feel that the time-stuck queen is just very, very interesting. And while it works fantastically well as a reveal, I just wish we could have learned that earlier. I think that would have been really, really cool to deal with that and like having that knowledge ahead of time, or maybe at least throw the showing of her stuck in that time tram earlier and not give any context as to what that is. And then we come to it. But it's just that visual was just so very thought-provoking to me.
I thoroughly disagree with you, Riley.
I do.
Okay,
because I think the way it's done is so clever because you do get the nurse introduced in part 2. And at first, she's just there in the background. She doesn't even speak in her first scene. And then the next time we see her is when she intervenes on the captain about to have Polyphase Avatron kill Romana. So she has some influence. Then the next time we see her, she speaks to the captain in ways that no one else would dare. She is condescending. So all of the time, they're just building this character up as having more and more influence and power, and you don't know why.
I think we were miscommunicating here. What I meant was I'm totally fine with that. I think what I would have preferred is the hint given earlier, the image of her being stuck as an older, elderly woman being shown earlier. And then we try to piece it together and I'm like, okay, that's why the nurse is acting that way.
I think that would give it away.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
I think that would give it away because I think the audience would make that connection far too easily. And I like that there's this mystery of who the fuck is this woman?
All right. So we've been talking about a lot of things. I want to talk about at least one thing before we get to the next part. And that's the showdown between K9 and the Robot Falcon.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. But before we do that, since it's on the topic of K9, I would like to mention K9 has the best joke, I believe, in the entire serial, in which he's explaining that he knows the doctor is about to appear. And then when the doctor does appear, the doctor mentions something effective like, "You didn't know I was coming, right?" And of course, K9 just goes along and humors him. I thought that was really lovely.
Yes. So let's talk about this battle. Why does the polyphase Avatron look like it's taking a shit when it's when it's shooting?
The effects that they decided to use were interesting, right? They didn't want to just have red laser beam versus red laser beam, so they came up with something
Right.
new, so that's why it's not as interesting. I'm like, just make it still a beam, just a different color and call it a day. But I kind of loved it because it was one of those situations where whatever I call it a falcon. I don't like that Avatron thing, whatever.
I think it's really meant to be a parrot because, pirates and parrots.
Yeah, but it looked more like a
falcon.
Like, I'm not gonna lie, sorry everyone. Plus, they would actually kill people. Parrots don't do that all that much.
To be fair, how many dogs do you know that shoot people in the dick?
How do you know? My dogs don't. But I still loved it, and I love K9 backing away and leading the Falcon elsewhere and all that. I just thought that was really well done. And then when we finally get K9 in part 4, oh, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
What I like about it too is they showed enough of it, and then they're still fighting, and we still move on, and we actually do resolve it.
Yes. And you see the resolution here, and this is what leads ultimately to our cliffhanger. Again, this is all kind of structured in a very smart way, because the Doctor then brings in Avatron when he surrenders to the Captain, and the Captain is so mad at this, to the point where he confers with Mr. Fibuli and the nurse, and they declare him guilty and prepare a plank for him. And, of course, the Doctor says, listen to me. And the Captain says, I shall listen to you when I hear you scream. Shoots at the Doctor's feet. He falls. We get the Captain and Mr. Fibuli laughing like Dr. Evil and crew. And that's our cliffhanger. And we're into part 4.
This is where I started to feel that my dislike of the Captain eased, because then we have a lot going on here. We have the Captain being upset when Mr. Fibuli dies. I know I'm jumping forward to the 4th part, but that's something I thought was very important in this part. And I wanted to go ahead and put out there, I'm not a complete hater. I'm not at this point. But you have to understand, going into it, after all the times I've seen characters like that on the show, there's nothing more to them. So maybe I should have read who wrote this and realized maybe there's something more here.
Yeah.
Maybe that was my mistake.
This episode, interestingly, I think very early on, when the Doctor, firstly, he reveals that the version of him that fell off was just a projection. And not everyone is quite as we seem. He tries to switch off the nurse and it doesn't work. And she talks about attaining almost fully corporeal form. I've obviously seen this story a bunch of times since childhood. So I couldn't tell you back in the day when I realized that this was Queen Xanxia as the nurse. But I would imagine for a significant part of the audience, this is probably the point where they made the connection.
Yeah.
It's definitely when I made the connection.
Yeah.
Because the thing that helped is that not only just her proving it, but the authority in which she started to talk about it. It was like, oh, she's just not a nurse.
And she's talking about the plan, believing it will work to reverse not reverse the aging process, but give her a new body and keep her basically immortal. I love how the Doctor describes it as bafflegab. That is such a Douglas Adams word. And she slaps him.
I like that. That was something really cool. You see the threat of physical force on the Doctor, but you don't really see him getting roughed up.
I do want to touch on something. The trying to keep herself alive forever. That's revealed in part 3, but I can see some of the extremely vain billionaires trying this shit in the world we have today. I can imagine Musk or Bezos doing this.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, and also, what is people's obsession with living forever? Like, I can see living for a long period of time, but forever just sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to go through another Dark Ages. Like, please don't make me do that. I wanted to touch on something that was a little bit tied with New Who, and that is Doctor Who messing up its own continuity with Sir Isaac Newton.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
Like, what are you doing, guys? I can understand, obviously other things have contradicted each other and they have to, rewrite canon and all this other stuff. But this one's so obvious.
Yeah, and it was funny because I was watching Wild Blue Yonder in the background while I was working this week. And just at the same time as watching this, I was like, wait, well, Blue Yonder kind of forgot about the Doctor being the one dropping the apple on Newton's head. Unless the Doctor was bullshitting here, which, you know,
Yeah.
it's the Doctor. It's entirely possible. He loves to name drop.
That's always an easy out for the show.
Yeah, you didn't see it happen, and so he was just bullshitting to impress someone.
One thing I wanted to take note of, and we talked about liking Chemos and everything, but he tries so hard but really doesn't accomplish anything.
No, he's just a very pleasant supporting character. Likewise, Moolah. I mean, you know, the ones who are effective here, you have the Doctor and Romana and you have the Mentiads.
Can we talk about the amount of shaky cam that's used?
Oh, lots of shaky cam. Lots of shaky cam this episode.
So much. Because basically we get to the point where the Doctor's trying to solve some things. He decides that he has to be in the TARDIS to do it. But then he's like, okay, I have to do this in the TARDIS, but I need the Mentiads to do things. And the superimposed heads within the engine room, what?
Questionable. Yeah, distinctly
Yeah.
questionable. Before we get onto that, there was this little subplot with the Captain being able to block the Mentiads with a machine and their psychic powers. And that leads to a line that I really like, where the Doctor sets up K9 to counterjam, basically. And the Captain orders his guards to destroy the counterjamming frequency projector. And Mr. Fibuli says, Captain, do you suppose that any of the guards actually know what a counterjamming frequency projector looks like? And the Captain's response is just, destroy everything!
It was so good. I love that. You're right.
Brilliant. But yeah, we effectively have the Mentiads saving the day by moving a spanner to sabotage the engines. Again, I think is really clever because they're not doing something big with their minds. They're just moving a little object and causing a lot of damage with it.
Which is so funny to me. Just the image of that as one of our big climactic parts is something so silly looking and stupid looking solving the problem, which is really funny to me. And I enjoy that. And such a classic special effects kind of trick that you've seen so many times before, even in very old movies, the levitating object floating around.
Yeah, and it does a lot of damage. I mean, the bridge is effectively in ruins. Mr. Fibuli dies during this part.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. Mr. Fibuli. And we've talked about it before, but this is where you really see that soft underbelly of the Captain who calls him his friend and vows to avenge him. It's quite beautiful.
I love that part. It started to help rehabilitate the character to me. I wish I would have seen that or something like that could have happened earlier, so I wouldn't have had to expect that this was just a one-note character.
And I know I'm disagreeing with you a lot this episode, Riley. I disagree with you here as well, because I think if we had been given that a lot earlier, it would have kind of dampened this moment. And I really like that after all the abuse he's doled out at Mr. Fibuli, repeatedly threatening to kill him, yelling at him, he is genuinely sad when Mr. Fibuli dies. And he probably considered himself to have two friends, one of whom was a robot bird, and the other was Mr. Fibuli, who he just slung verbal abuse at the whole time. So it turns out the Captain was onto something with his plan, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the Doctor just adopts it and modifies it a little bit to deal with Queen Xanxia, who, by the way, kills the Captain.
I saw it coming, but it was still really rather sad. But yeah, they just have to change the plan a little bit because they're like, we need Califrax. So how do we change the geometric shape in which to then make it still work? And that's what they figure out. What I find interesting is they talk about like finding and getting the key, but they don't actually show it at the end of the day.
Yeah, they don't. So it happens off screen. Again, the segment of the key is such a secondary plot here. It really didn't need to be here. And I get it. It's the theme of the season. But if this had been part of season 15 or been part of season 17, they could have so easily taken that part out and not lost a damn thing from the plot.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the death of Xanxia because it is a little bit of an anticlimax, or at least the nurse version of her, because just as she's about to kill the Doctor, Kimmus and Moolah show up, shoot the nurse, and that projection destabilizes and vanishes. And then they destroy her when they blow up the bridge at the very end. It's a little bit of an anticlimax, but it's fine.
What they could have done is they could have shown a 1 second shot of the old Queen Xanxia and then just shown the bridge blowing up. And that's how you could have done that. But, you know, it's fine.
One of the problems is that since it's a projection, you don't really know, well, can the projection come back? Did it just disrupt it for a few minutes because they shot at it? I was waiting at that part. The nurse version of her is going to pop up again somewhere, isn't she, in the last minute? But no.
Nope. And then they just blow her up. Which takes us to the end of the story, because the Doctor and Romana head off, obviously, to go and pick up Califrax.
Right, and with the explosion, the whole classic plunger box,
Yes.
very Looney Tunes.
Which the Mentiads get to do.
Right.
Brilliant.
Very Wile E. Coyote.
Before we go ahead and score this, I feel like this deserves some camp count points,
Yes.
particularly for the captain.
Absolutely.
Any other nominations beyond the captain? Does Avatron get a few?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
He's pretty cool looking. He kind of looks like a transformer.
How many are we giving for the captain?
3.
3? Julie, agree?
I can be down for that.
All right, we'll go with 3. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and rate this, and I get to go first. And I think this story was a lot of fun. You can tell Douglas Adams is fairly early in his career, but a lot of the themes of his writing are there. It's funny. It's very, very well structured. I love the characters. I think my one quibble about the characters is outside of the ones we actually get to know, the rest of the population of Zanuck are pretty faceless, and really we don't get to see a huge amount of them. But that's such a minor quibble. I think I'm in total disagreement with Riley. I think Bruce Purchase is brilliant as the captain. There's only one person I would cast in his place, and as I said, that is Brian Blessed. But overall, I just really, really enjoy this story, and I always worried that was because I had a nostalgia factor of having seen it so many times as a kid. But as I watched it with a more critical eye, I saw how clever it is and how well structured, all those things I already mentioned, and I somehow love it even more. So for me, I'm going to go with 8.5 Polyphase Avatron poops out of 10. Julie, you're up next.
I believe I'm in much better agreement with Anthony than Riley on this one. I loved this story. I loved everyone in it. I think that the plot and the dialogue is superb. There's a few things that they could have done a little bit better on. Some of the special effects, CSO could have been a little bit better. But I also know that reading some of the behind the scenes, it was just Douglas Adams not knowing what you can and cannot do. So I am going to give it 8.5 Go Swifts out of 10.
Oh dear. Oh dear. All right, Riley, bring us down.
Deep breath. Deep breath. Okay. I want to be very clear. I enjoyed the serial. I enjoyed it very much. I think what we're dealing with here is a situation where you have a really, really wonderful meal, and through no fault of the eater or the chef, there is just one thing that you just didn't like. Very small thing. And in the end, you realize, oh, I understand now why you did that. But in the beginning, when you're thinking it's going to go all in that direction, it just sours you because you're like, oh boy, that's all we're going to do. We're going to have this blustering all the way through. I just can't handle that. I enjoyed everything else. But it's one small thing. And part of the problem here is that it was extra frustrating to me. I sounded more frustrated because I feel like if there was that one change, I would be head over heels about this. I still enjoy this a lot. So, for example, if we just change the character of the captain to maybe another type of Douglas Adams character like Zaphod Beeblebrox, like a more fun, hilarious, more comedic character than just the blustering, loud guy, which I just can't handle, then maybe I would have enjoyed it more. But I did enjoy this. So it's just that one little thing. So don't write me your hate mail, people out there, if you feel differently. And also just to point out that Romana, wonderfully written in this one. I love the humor. It's not going to be shocking for me. I'm going to come in and say that I'm giving this 7.5 bloody Bruce Purchases out of 10.
You know, that's higher than I thought you were going to go, Riley.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, it's one of those situations where it's like you get more irritated about one little thing because if that one thing was different, you know you would have been absolutely in love with it. And that's why it just stuck with me even harder.
So that gives us a story average of 8.17, which is the highest we've had since Talons.
Wow.
Whoa.
See you later, season 15.
Yeah, this season is shaping out better already. So let's see if it keeps up that momentum. And with that, we're sadly at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening to us. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion of the Pirate Planet. We will, of course, be back next time as we talk about the Stones of Blood. But in the meantime, take care, and as always, have a good one. You have been listening to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension with Riley Schreck, Julie Philippek, and myself, Anthony Williams. This episode, Kids Ask Your Parents, was recorded on Sunday, the 28th of April, 2024. If this is your first time listening into the show, all of our previous episodes are available wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at OutWatchers4D, and you can also email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, please do subscribe and consider leaving us a review or rating on your favorite podcasting app. All of those things really do help the show. And always remember, bigger-than-life characters are often hiding something under all that bluster.